Hello and welcome to the first episode in my Factorio Fundamentals tutorial series. I'm Xterminator and thank you for joining me today. So this series is going to cover what I consider to be kind of fundamental and core aspects of the game and teachings that will hopefully help you as new players or even intermediate and perhaps veteran players as well in some cases progress through the game with less of a headache and less difficulty. Now, of course, there are always going to be challenges in the game that you face, but I'm hoping that with this series and these core concept and fundamental ideas that you will hopefully be able to take some of these and translate them into your gameplay to just make the whole experience a bit smoother and better for you. I do want to mention before we get into this that this particular series is not about builds themselves. So you are going to see me make some builds in this video and future videos in this series that are probably not optimal. Probably, they are not perfectly blueprintable builds. That's not what this series is about. Again, this is about the core concepts and fundamental ideas that at least I take into the game when I go to play, and it helps me through it and has for all the years and many, many hours I've played. So this first episode, we are going to be covering the idea of working backwards and isolating recipes or ingredients. So as new players, and I experienced this myself, so I am speaking from experience, and I have had actually several questions, especially lately on my stream and on my videos about this topic. So I think it's a perfect one to start with. As a new player, it can become quite overwhelming to dive into these recipes in the game. They're pretty much all new to you as a new player, and it can be hard to tackle them, especially some of the more complicated ones, particularly the science packs. It can be quite difficult to get those. It can also be difficult sometimes to figure out how to route things in your base and how to get things to where they need to go. Now, this is a bit of a side topic, the actual routing of things. I'm going to touch on it just because I do take this principle of working backwards towards that. So we're going to start with that one because it is the least complicated and pretty quick. I have a basic smelting setup here. I've just set up for this demonstration. A quick note, you will see these special purple buildings. These are in the testing tools mod, which is just what I use to set up these demos. It has nothing to do with what I'm actually going to show. So we set this up, and I have a couple smelters here, making a few things. Of course, some of them aren't on. That is completely fine for this demonstration. So we have these two belts that are not actually hooked up and connected, and we would like these two smelters to be copper. Now, this is a fairly basic example of this, but I think it is still decent enough to demonstrate. A lot of times it can be difficult, and I find this myself even, to route things from point A to point B. And in the topic of working backwards, I do find that it helps a lot to work backwards in this aspect as well. So instead of, for example, we have this copper train here, which is unloading. Instead of coming, necessarily starting from here and trying to work our way, snake our way through all this and hope we end up in the right spot, I a lot of times find that it's actually quite a bit easier to start from your end point that you want this to end at and work backwards to where it's actually starting from. And that way because it may not work this way for everybody, but I do find that this makes it a bit easier to route. So in this case, if we work backwards from this point, we have a general idea that this is over here on this side of these smelters, and there's a fair bit here that we may need to route through. So what we're going to do is literally just start the other direction. So again, instead of bringing the copper to here, we're going to bring the belt from here to the copper, and then of course once it connects, it will be flowing through. So I'm going to start by just connecting these here. Obviously, if this were not here, we wouldn't need an underground, but just for the sake of it, we will go ahead and do that. And I'm going to do these simultaneously. Again, I do find that quite a bit easier, and I hope you guys do as well, that doing these things simultaneously is, one, perhaps a little bit more efficient, so you aren't running one down there and then running all the way back to bring the other one back. And it helps you just kind of figure out exactly where these need to go. Now, of course, like I mentioned, this is not going to be a perfect belt weaving technique. This is not going to be perfect belt routing. As you can see here, we have a little hiccup where we want to run these belts through, but there's actually a belt in the way. And, if we had come from the left here, we maybe wouldn't have encountered this in the same way and would have potentially been even more difficult to route around this. Maybe I would have actually ended up going this way and underneath and then had to do some trickery here to get this to fit in. Who knows? But I do think that then routing it this way does make it a bit easier, and typically, at least for me, it makes it cleaner. Again, I mentioned this is a bit of a side topic. The main topic is in regards to working backwards with actual recipes and production itself, more so than routing. But I did feel this was a decent thing to cover because it's very quick and pretty straightforward. And as you can see, we now have these 2 points hooked up fairly nicely, aside from this little janky part right here. And personally, I just find this far easier to do going from your end point to your start point, rather than what may be initially intuitive is going from the start point to the end point. You can almost do both as well. Sometimes you can meet halfway. You can start coming from your point A, and then if you get a little bit stuck, maybe just leave it there and then go to your point B and start working backwards from there. I have found that that works quite well too. So there's that little side topic. Now on to the main topic of this video, and I'm going to walk you through this live. Again, I do want to mention this is not about builds, this is not about perfection, this is about general concepts and ideas. I will be doing another tutorial series called Factorio Academy, where I go through very neat and tidy builds and give you blueprints for them. And they're going to be really, really great and as perfect as I can make them. But this is not what this is. That's not what this is about. So we have a makeshift bus here with 3 basic materials: copper, iron, and circuits. And we have some laboratories over here that are ready to accept science packs. Now, as a new player, and even some intermediate players, and even more advanced players I have seen, myself included in some cases, get stuck on these more complicated recipes. As we know, these science packs get more and more complicated as you go through them. And especially as a new player, it can be very overwhelming to look at these and just be instantly overwhelmed. So we're going to use green science for this example, the logistics science pack recipe, otherwise known as green science. And if you are new to the game and haven't really built this before, and haven't actually even automated belts or inserters necessarily, you're going to look at this probably and be like, wow, okay, how do I even conquer this and overcome it? I need to make these belts and these inserters to get this, but I haven't even automated these. I don't even know how to do that. And you go over here and you see that an inserter also needs electronic circuits and gears, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is quite overwhelming. Oh, and then geez, I need belts with also need gear wheels, and how I'm gonna build these in regards to the science pack, and then I got to figure out where to put all this stuff. And if you start with, if you try to start with the first thing, say just belts or inserters, you're going to end up where actually, you may not, but it's quite possible you're going to end up where your actual end result of science packs is going to be really not at all where you wanted it or how you wanted it set up. Once you do get to that point, which may be a struggle in and of itself. So the way I like to take a dive into this is, again, the concept of working backwards is number one, and then number two, and almost in my opinion more importantly, is isolating recipes and steps in these production steps here, in these production ingredients. So instead of just looking at the science pack as a whole and being overwhelmed by the fact that we need to make these two things, which also take things, we are going to start very simply by placing down our end result of what we want, which is green science packs, otherwise logistic science packs. So we're going to place these down. Again, not perfect where they're going to go. Let's just decide that they're going to go right over here. And we're just going to place down 5. I find that 5 is a pretty good number for these to start with. And we're going to set these recipes already. Quick note, to copy paste these as I just did, you select the recipe you want, you shift right click on one and then shift left click the others to copy it onto them. That's how I did that very quickly. And we are going to have these output right here because they do need to go to the lab. And we are setting this up. We are getting this all ready to output before we even consider what needs to go into them. And this is because this allows us to have an end point and an end destination that we want to achieve, rather than starting and then ending up, well, heck, maybe our science packs actually end up like like way over here or like after the labs or something. You know, that may not happen, but it is possible. We're going to set these up, and we're also going to set up our insertion. These, of course, need 2 ingredients, so we only need the 1 belt, since each belt has 1 lane, or 2 lanes, sorry. One ingredient per lane can be done, so you can do 2 ingredients. And this is now all complete and ready to accept the science packs. So now, we have that set up. We know our destination. What would be the next step in getting there? Again, instead of looking at all of this at once and just being like, okay, well, do I do belts first? Do I insert it? Do I do both at once? What do I do? Just pick one. Belts. We're going to make belts. And don't even worry about the inserters right now. We are focusing purely on the belts. And we are just going to simply make belts. And we're going to just place these in a somewhat, hopefully, logical place to these science packs. Typically, I would be building this a lot closer to my bus. So if we, for example, just hypothetically say our bus is right here, it may not be super smart to place this here because it kind of blocks your bus from expansion pretty quickly. Of course, your science packs do as well, but if you remove this, you have all this extra room. So typically, I like placing these either above or below this in some fashion. So let's just place this here. And we're going to set that. Okay, again, we now have another end result of what we want in this particular step. We want belt. Okay, now let's just purely look at these ingredients. We want iron plate. Hey, we already have that on our bus. And we also want gear wheels. Well, gear wheels, while this may start getting a little overwhelming, are actually quite simple. Iron plates. And if we recall, we already have iron plates and we already need iron plates. So the only ingredient we actually need for this is iron plate, essentially, in the most basic form. But we do need to make gear wheels. Now, in some cases, people may automate gear wheels somewhere else in their factory and put it on their bus, and that makes this process even easier at this point. I did not do that for the sake of this tutorial because I wanted it to be a little more complex, just to show you an example of how it can still be simple. And we're just going to place a gear machine right next to it. We're going to select this, hit Q to take a copy of this, and we're going to insert these, right? We need the gears in here. Well, we need iron for both of these, and we're going to run an iron line down here anyway, so why don't we just run this here? Of course, this was a very temporary example, so we're going to get rid of that. And we now need to run our iron line over this way. So we're just starting with that. We are not even having in our mind at this point that we need inserters or anything else. We are purely working on the belt. The only slight thing we might want to keep in mind here is just a general space awareness. Maybe just a general awareness that we will need another item for these green science packs. So we potentially want to leave room for that somewhere. Is really the only thing that you maybe want to keep in mind here. But don't be getting overwhelmed by the inserter, what you may need for that, or these shared ingredients at the moment. Purely just working on the belt. And voila, just like that, the belt is done. Look how easy that was. We started with green science, needing these 2 things that perhaps you've never made before. They need these other things, you know, that maybe, I don't know if you've made on your bus yet. And now, we not only have the green science machine's place, we have one of the ingredients done already. Now, of course, that was a simpler one. Now, let's look purely at inserters. Okay, this is a bit more complicated, but actually, when you look at it, it's quite similar to the belt recipe. It also requires iron and iron gear wheels, which is the exact 2 things that the belt recipe required. And then it requires an electronic circuit. Now, in our case, we do have electronic circuits on the bus. I would say this is far more common of a thing to have on your main bus or general production line, even if you don't do a main bus style, than gear wheels. So I did put this on here. Now, some cases you may not have this set up or not set up yet, and you can set it up locally, but I would say it's probably quite likely you maybe will have these automated in some form. Okay, now of course these are on the wrong belt. I reversed my belt a little bit. That is, you know, I'm doing this live. You know, again, this is a not super edited perfect build because sometimes mistakes happen, and you know what? This may happen to you. So how about we're just gonna leave this. This is how we wanted it. Why don't we just run this guy right along here? And there we go. You know, little mistakes happen. Like I said, maybe that happened to you. No big deal. Okay, so now, inserters. Well, we could, of course, share this iron gear wheel machine and have it output this way into the inserters, but that's going to actually strain this a fair bit. I'm not going to get too heavily into ratios in this video, but we do know that this needs a gear wheel every half a second. You can see down there, 0.5 second craft time. And these actually take half a second to make a gear wheel. So sharing this is actually going to strain this quite heavily and reduce production on both the belt and inserter machine. Speaking of being strained, we can see this actually isn't able to keep up. There's lacking iron plate, and that is due simply to this inserter not being able to insert the iron plate fast enough. So if you have fast inserters, you could easily replace this. If you don't, simply place another inserter. And that should pretty easily fix the issue here, as you can see. But what we could do is we could just place these side by side. We know we need another gear machine. And we have an iron belt right here. In fact, we have the iron belt and we need iron for the inserters. So why don't we just set up the inserter production as well? And lo and behold, just like that, we have the inserters 2/3 of the way done. The only other thing we need is circuits. Now, of course, in this case, it's extremely easy because we have circuits directly on our bus. Now, if you didn't, you would have to set up circuits locally, which again is not the worst thing. We could do something as simple as, say, putting an inserter machine here, or sorry, a circuit machine here. And what is this other machine going to be? Well, this is going to be copper cable. And again, I have them on the bus. That would be very straightforward. We would literally just route them over here and connect them in. But let's just make this a little more complicated to show you that it still can actually be fairly simple. Okay, well, what do circuits need? Circuits need iron, and they need copper. Okay, well, or copper cable. The copper cable needs copper. Okay, well, we have iron here again. Now, running one belt through all of this perhaps will create some bottlenecks farther down the road. One thing you could do is put a splitter, move this belt out one, and put a splitter here and split off at each machine that's taking iron. It's of course not going to be perfect because the first one's going to get 50% and then the next one's going to get even less than that. But it will at least give them each some, even if it's less. It may get to the point in this particular setup where like this one down here and this one just get none because these are consuming all of it. But that is something, you know, that maybe is on a case-by-case basis, depending on your production level on both the iron and consumption level on this end. So we have iron here. We need to insert these. And lastly, we need some copper. Well, of course, probably going to have copper somewhere automated in your factory at this point by the time you're green science. So we're just going to run this backwards. Again, the concept of running from our destination to the starting point rather than from here out there, because this just allows us to line our belt up a little better without trying to eyeball it. You know, it already is where it needs to go. And we're going to split this off. And here we go. So this is going to get the cable. This has the iron it needs. This has that it needs. Now, of course, in this particular instance, I've blocked myself in a bit. We could move all this, but again, not the biggest deal. Easily solved. We could, you know, we could underground this and put a long-handed inserter here. We could put a long-handed inserter here, which may actually just be the best option. If we put one here, we can run this way. Again, this is quite messy. In my case, I would always have circuits on the bus. So this whole apparatus right here would be unneeded, and I would have just inserted out the back here and connected it into this belt. Again, I did this just for demonstration purposes. I would highly suggest having green circuits or electronic circuits automated in your production. bus or general belts if you're not going a bus, if you're going more spaghetti. So you can just run them in, because of course that would make the routing of this far easier. We wouldn't have needed this, or if we had put this underneath, could have routed out the back. That would have been what I would normally do. I would route this just from where this inserter is, where this machine is, and connect it into this belt. Probably something I would have this come up here. And since we do not want this on the same side, I would probably just do something a little bit like that and sideload it. But even for this case, even in the worst case where we block ourselves in and do this, that, you know, hopefully would not be needed, there's still always a way out of this. No need to panic. Sideload onto that. And we now have successfully created green science. And just for the heck of it, we're going to put power poles because, of course, in your factory, you would probably have them. So I'm going to get that going. And there, before you know it, you have green science. Not that overwhelming. When you start at the endpoint and work your way back, and you isolate the ingredients in the recipe you're trying to make one at a time, instead of looking at all of them and trying to make all of them at once, just focus out and isolate one and work on that one until it's done, keeping in the back of your mind that you may need room for the other ones, but not necessarily worrying about all their ingredients at the moment. And then you end up with a happy coincidence like this, where these actually end up needing two of the same exact ingredients that this needed, and you're only missing one. And there we go, guys. So we now have green science automated. Pretty straightforward. Just isolating the things and working in reverse seemed to help a lot, because at least for me, I can guarantee you that had I started making belts somewhere, like not place these first, but instead just placed a belt machine down, you know, started making some belt here, tried to figure out some inserters, you know, over here, etc., and then tried to figure out where the heck I'm going to put green science. It would have been, at least for me, a lot more complicated. I do truly stand behind this. It may not work for everybody, but I have suggested it to new players in the past, and they said that it did help. It has helped me immensely, and this is basically how I play the game now. And as you can see, aside from a few little hiccups, of course, I did make a mistake. That happens when you're doing things live and you aren't focusing on absolutely perfect builds, but it's an easy fix. You know, Factorio, you make mistakes. You have routing issues. You have belt issues, and usually it's really not that big of a disaster, and it's quite easy to just take care of and change up as you need it. And there you go, guys. That is the first episode in my Factorio Fundamentals tutorial. I hope it was helpful. These will improve in the future, of course, and I would like your feedback to help me improve. This is, of course, like I said, the first episode, and there are probably details I need to iron out, maybe some different presentation techniques. I would like your constructive feedback in the comments, and let me know. And if this did help you, please do leave a like so other people can find it and it can help them. And if you want more content like this, definitely subscribe as well. But I would like to hear your thoughts down below, any feedback you have, if this helped you, if you have any suggestions for future fundamental tutorials. I would love those as well, because you probably have ideas that I haven't thought of. And that will do it. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you all, and do take care.